Last deep dive, we plunged into the epic world of Beowulf. Swords, fate, dragons, and the raw beginnings of English literature.
Yeah, it really felt like stepping into a different language, didn't it?
Yeah, definitely. But one that's undeniably our ancestor.
A powerful reminder of just how much English has transformed. And speaking of transformations and family trees, well, this time we're looking at a different branch entirely, but one very close to home.
That's right. We're diving into the relationship between English and German.
Mm-hmm.
On the surface, they can feel like quite different languages, but dig a little deeper. And, well, you find they're linguistic cousins with a surprisingly intertwined history.
Absolutely. And the material we're exploring today really shows that while they certainly went their separate ways grammatically, German has quietly but, significantly shaped English in ways many of us don't even realize.
It's a story about shared origins, dramatic linguistic shifts, and this constant flow of words between cultures. So we'll start with where they both began, right? Nestled in the West Germanic family.
Exactly. Then we'll trace how English grammar took a fundamentally different path than German, becoming simpler, more analytic.
Okay.
But crucially, how despite this split, vocabulary kept moving between them.
And we'll uncover specific German words that found their way into English across some, well, maybe unexpected fields: science, philosophy, even military terms.
Yeah, and we'll explore a major catalyst for this word exchange: the impact of German immigration, particularly in the United States.
Ah, right. Bringing everyday German words right into the heart of American English and then beyond.
Mm-hmm. It's quite the story.
It is. It's a deep dive that really makes you think about where the words you use every day actually come from. And just as a little teaser for what's next, our following deep dive tackles a massive language-altering event, the Norman Conquest of 1066.
Oh, that's a big one.
Huge. But for now, let's focus on the cousins, English and German.
Absolutely. So to understand their relationship, we really have to go back to the roots.
Yeah.
Both English and German belong to the same major language group.
All right, we're talking about the West Germanic branch. So think of it like this huge family tree called Indo-European sprawling across Eurasia. Way back, maybe over 5,000 years ago, there was this single ancestral language, Proto-Indo-European.
Right.
People speaking it were nomads spreading out, and as they did, their language started to diverge. Different dialects that eventually became distinct languages.
Exactly. And within that massive Indo-European family, you have branches like Celtic, Romance, Slavic, Indo-Aryan, and the one we're interested in today, Germanic.
Okay.
And English and German are firmly in that Germanic branch, specifically the Western sub-branch, alongside languages like Dutch.
So they started from the same linguistic neighborhood, basically.
Very much.
But then things changed dramatically, particularly with grammar. The material highlights this huge shift that happened in English.
This is really one of the most significant stories in the history of English. Old English, the language the Anglo-Saxons brought over, was structured very differently from modern English.
How?
Well, it was much more like German still is today, or
Right.
Latin or Greek, in that it was a synthetic language.
Okay, synthetic. What does that mean in plain English?
It means that grammatical relationships, things like whether a noun is the subject or the object, if it's singular or plural, or, when a verb's action happened, are shown primarily through changes to the end of words, through inflections.
Ah, you mean like case endings on nouns and pronouns or complex verb conjugation?
Exactly. Think of how German still has those different endings on articles and adjectives depending on the noun's role in the sentence. Old English had a lot of that.
Right.
Nouns had distinctions for things like subject, possessive, object. The source says up to 8 forms for some.
8 forms, wow.
And there was grammatical gender, too, that didn't always match biological sex. Adjectives changed their endings. Verbs had multiple forms just for the present tense, unlike modern English, where we mostly just add that S for Heshite.
Huh.
The source even mentions that the Old English word for ride, redan, had 13 different forms.
13 forms for ride. That's a workout for the memory.
It really is. That period is often described as the period of full inflection for English, but over time, English started shedding these endings.
It just dropped them.
Gradually, yes.
Right.
It's simplified. Moving through what's called the period of leveled inflection in Middle English to what we have now, the period of lost inflection in modern English.
And that's how English became analytic.
Yes. Modern English is much more analytic. We rely much more on word order. Subject, verb, object is pretty fixed,
Right.
and we use prepositions like to, from, with, rather than changing the ends of words so much. Actually, English is quite unusual among European languages and having almost no adjective endings at all anymore.
That makes so much sense. It explains why English word order feels so, well, rigid compared to German, where you can often rearrange parts of a sentence because the endings tell you the grammar.
Precisely. And German, for its part, remained much more conservative grammatically. It kept many of those complex inflections that English dropped.
So you have these two cousins, starting from the same point, but English goes through this massive grammatical simplification, becoming analytic.
While German holds on to its more synthetic structure. Yeah.
You might expect that kind of fundamental divergence to just pull them miles apart, you know, leaving very little connection beyond their shared ancient history.
And yet, that's not the end of the story at all. Despite this major split in grammar, they continued to interact and exchange vocabulary.
Wow.
This is where that surprising influence comes in.
Right. Because when we think about foreign words in English, the usual suspects are, what, French or Latin?
Usually, yeah.
Filling our language with terms for law, government, fine dining, science. German's contribution feels less obvious, more stealthy.
It certainly is less heralded, maybe, but it's significant and it spans various fields, often reflecting specific points of contact or German innovation described in the material.
Like in the world of science and technology, it turns out Germany had a long history in mining, for example.
Yeah, they did. And as German miners were often pioneering techniques and discovering new minerals, their names for these things were adopted directly into English.
Really? Like what?
Well, we find words like quartz, nickel, shale, and zinc entering the language this way.
Wow. Okay, quartz, nickel, zinc. Those sound like perfectly normal English words. You'd never guess their origin.
It's a quiet influence, isn't it? And the borrowing wasn't just about minerals. Specific inventions and the names of the inventors themselves have also become English words.
Oh, like...
Think of Fahrenheit, from Daniel Gabriel Fahrenheit, who created that temperature scale, or diesel, named after Rudolf Diesel, the engine inventor.
Oh, of course. Fahrenheit, diesel. Those are names that literally became part of our common vocabulary. That's fascinating.
They're great examples of how German scientific and technical advancements directly contributed to the English lexicon.
Okay, so moving beyond the lab and the workshop, the material also points to German influence in philosophy and politics.
This reflects the enormous impact of German thinkers in the 18th and 19th centuries, figures like Kant and Hegel, and later Marx and Engels.
Right, the big names.
Their complex philosophical and political ideas often came with new concepts that English speakers adopted, bringing the German terms with them.
So we borrowed the words for the ideas.
Essentially, yes. The list includes terms like objective, subjective, transcendental, also standpoint, and worldview.
Worldview, that feels like such a fundamental word in English today.
Yeah.
Galton show.
Right, that's the one. And from the political and economic sphere associated with Marx and Engels, terms like surplus value and class struggle came into English.
It's amazing to trace them back to German philosophical discourse. Standpoint, too.
It really shows how powerful abstract ideas developed in one language can, transcend borders and enter the vocabulary of another, enriching its capacity to discuss those very concepts.
And it wasn't only abstract thought. There's also significant influence from German in military and warfare terms.
Yeah, this often reflects developments in German military technology and tactics, particularly apparent during periods of conflict like the World Wars.
Makes sense. As new strategies and weapons emerged in Germany, the English language needed terms to describe them.
And we just borrowed the names often.
Like?
Examples from the source include Flak, referring to anti-aircraft fire.
Flak, right?
Panzer, for armored tanks. And Blitz, which is short for Blitzkrieg, meaning lightning war.
Blitz and Panzer definitely have that distinct German sound. Flak, too.
Interestingly, black market is also listed among these borrowings, likely tied to the conditions of war.
Huh. Black market. That one's less obvious.
It's a stark reminder that conflict and rapid technological development are powerful drivers of language change and borrowing.
Now, to put all this German vocabulary influence into perspective, the material makes a really interesting comparison. It contrasts it with the influence from Celtic languages.
It does, and it's quite a striking contrast. Think about it. The Celts were in Britain for about 1,000 years before the Anglo-Saxons even arrived. They were the original historically recorded inhabitants.
Right.
Yet their influence on English vocabularies is described as disproportionately insignificant.
Really? Why is that? You'd think there would be more interaction and borrowing just from proximity.
Well, the material attributes this largely to the attitude and actions of the Anglo-Saxon invaders. It wasn't a peaceful integration, more of a conquest.
Yeah.
There's mention of a terror policy aimed at eliminating or isolating the native Celtic populations. Language became a dividing line. Anything associated with the Celtic language was, the source suggests, marked with shame.
Wow, that's harsh.
Many survivors were pushed to the edges of the island, Wales, Scotland, Cornwall, or enslaved. Later, under Norman rule, Celtic languages were deliberately placed at the very bottom of the linguistic hierarchy.
So unlike later interactions,
Yeah.
the Anglo-Saxons deliberately minimized contact and borrowing from the people they conquered.
That seems to be the argument presented. The few Celtic words that did enter Old English were either borrowed earlier on the continent before the invasion, often related to conflict, as Celts were known mercenaries, or they were place names that just stuck to the land itself. We see
Yeah.
Celtic roots in names like Thames, London, York, Leeds, Lincoln,
Place names make sense.
and composite names like Buckinghamshire and Leicestershire. One significant word that did come in, apparently borrowed via Irish missionaries, was cross, which eventually replaced the native Old English word rude.
Okay, so cross is Celtic via Irish. Interesting.
But overall, very few everyday words compared to later influences.
So you have this minimal vocabulary influence from the island's original inhabitants, despite 1,000 years there, contrasted with significant borrowing from German much later, even though Germans weren't conquering England directly in the same way after the Old English period.
It really highlights that language borrowing isn't just about two languages being physically near each other. It's deeply shaped by social dynamics, power structures, attitudes towards other cultures,
Right.
and the nature of the contact, whether it's conquest, trade, intellectual exchange, or crucially, immigration.
Ah, yes, immigration. The material talks a lot about the impact of German immigrants, especially in America.
Yeah.
This seems like a totally different pathway for German words to enter English.
It is. And it's arguably the source of many of the German loanwords that feel most familiar and integrated into English today.
How so?
Because they didn't come from academic texts or military manuals necessarily, but from everyday life brought by people.
Tell us about those waves of immigration. When did that happen?
Well, the material details several key periods. Germans started migrating to North America, seeking religious freedom quite early, as far back as 1640, apparently.
Well, that early.
Yeah, with numbers increasing significantly by 1670. But the 19th century saw a massive surge.
What drove that?
Economic hardship, like the potato famine in the mid-1800s, spurred large numbers of rural Germans to emigrate. Then, after the failed 1848 revolution in Germany, political refugees from urban areas also sought refuge, primarily in the United States.
And this wasn't just a small group, right? We're talking large numbers.
Millions. The material states that nearly 10 million German immigrants arrived in the U.S. in the 19th century alone.
10 million. That's huge.
It created a significant population center, often called the German Belt, stretching across the U.S. from Pennsylvania potentially as far west as Oregon.
Wow.
And by 2014, data showed there were 46 million German Americans, making them the largest single European ethnic group in the U.S.
That's an incredible population base. So even as those generations largely transitioned to speaking English.
They inevitably brought elements of their language with them, didn't they? Particularly words for things common in their culture or daily life.
Right.
These words became part of American English, and from there, many spread back to British English and became part of global English.
What kind of everyday words are we talking about? The really common ones.
The material gives us some great examples that feel incredibly integrated into English now. Kindergarten, Christmas tree,
Ah, yes, kindergarten, Christmas tree too.
hot dog, hamburger, lager, and beer garden.
Wait, hot dog and hamburger, those feel as American as it gets. You're saying they have German roots?
That's what the source material attributes them to German immigrant influence. It just shows how deeply integrated these contributions are, especially in American English vocabulary related to food and leisure, which then spread widely.
That's amazing. Kindergarten, Christmas tree. Okay, those make cultural sense. But hamburger,
Yeah,
wow.
it's a powerful illustration of how immigration enriches the language of the receiving culture, adding terms for new concepts, foods, or practices, often things we just take for granted.
It's really fascinating to realize these incredibly common words have such clear German roots brought over by people seeking new lives or opportunities.
It truly is. It shows how human migration and cultural exchange shape language at its most fundamental, everyday level, often without us even noticing the history embedded in the words themselves.
So, pulling back from all those specific examples, we've seen this journey today, English and German, starting as West Germanic cousins,
Hmm.
taking dramatically different paths grammatically. English simplifying into an analytic structure, German remaining more synthetic.
Right, that big split.
Yet despite that divergence, there was this consistent flow of vocabulary.
Yes, a flow from German into English that shows up in specialized fields like science, philosophy, and military affairs, reflecting intellectual and technological exchange.
And then, maybe even more profoundly, in everyday language, especially through those massive waves of German immigration to the United States.
Exactly, bringing words for common items and cultural practices right into the mainstream.
It highlights that language history isn't just shaped by big violent events like the invasions we talked about last time or, the Norman conquest we'll get to.
Yeah.
It's also shaped by scientific discovery, philosophical movements, trade, and the simple, powerful act of millions of people moving across the globe, bringing their culture and their words with them.
Absolutely. German's influence on English might not be as perhaps overtly prestigious as French or Latin in some areas, but it's certainly deep, varied, and pervasive once you start looking.
You really do see the words you use every day in a new light.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads us to a thought to maybe leave you with as we wrap up.
Mm-hmm.
Given how much history and human movement is embedded in language, how many words you use regularly might have surprising hidden origins, just like these German examples.
Yeah, or maybe thinking about how languages borrow.
Hmm.
What does the type of words a language borrows from another often tell us about the relationship and interactions between those cultures at the time? Is it science? Is it food? Is it philosophy?
Good question. What does that pattern reveal?
Perhaps something to ponder the next time you grab a hot dog or decorate a Christmas tree.
Indeed. Language history is truly all around us if we pay attention. We hope this deep dive into the relationship between English and German has given you some new insights.
We certainly encourage you to keep looking into the origins of the words you encounter. It's fascinating stuff.
And be sure to join us for our next deep dive, where we'll explore that monumental turning point, the Norman conquest of 1066, and the dramatic changes it brought to the English language.
A whole new flood of influences awaited English then. It's going to be another great exploration.
We look forward to diving in with you next time.